Hello, welcome back to Math Time with Professor Prime, and I'm your host as always, Professor Prime. So, today we're going to talk about propane and propane accessories. Well, sort of. We're going to talk about math and King of the Hill, and while there are a lot of pieces of media and different concepts that bear that name, we're going to talk about the animated sitcom that initially ran from 1997 to 2010. 13 seasons, nearly 260 episodes, at around 20 minutes a pop. In that show, at the beginning of this year, 2023, at the time of this recording, has, an official revival on the way. So, what I like about what I just said is, it describes King of the Hill and some things about it, but it's also inherently mathematical. And as we progress through the video, I'm going to talk about King of the Hill and how math is used across the board, both in the comedy, in the meta sense, i.e., how that show comes to you and things surrounding that show, but also how math is used within universe. And so I'm going to enjoy talking about this. You're free to assume spoilers ahead. But I think you're good either way in the sense that it won't destroy your experience. But I want to talk about the idea of character development later on and how that makes spoilers not as relevant. But that's a whole nother thing, and I'll get into it if I remember it. But so you're free to assume spoilers ahead if you want, and you can avoid the video if you'd like, and I get that. But if you don't care about spoilers, or if you've seen King of the Hill, then tune in. So let's get into it. First and foremost, I'm also going to talk about how I feel about King of the Hill throughout this. So first and foremost, King of the Hill is one of my favorite shows, like period. I enjoy the humor for the most part because not everything's gonna land, but the jokes. It's a number game. It's a numbers game, and we're gonna get into that too. So I like the humor. I enjoy the characters and how they interact with each other, and I think even at its worst, it's still not that bad, and that's saying something. And I think that for 13 seasons, it was pretty consistent. And I know some people think like the later seasons dropped off, but it's like, were you watching the same show? I feel like it was pretty consistently good. But so if we dive deeper though, so let's talk about the idea of comedy in general, and then I'm going to talk about some other stuff as we progress. So when it comes to comedy, comedy is actually something that's inherently mathematical. Maybe you've thought of that, and maybe you haven't. But here's the thing: just take the basic structure of a joke that you can play around with. It's like you have setup plus punchline equals joke, and you can play around with what that setup is and what that punchline is and what the actual joke will be. You can be subversive as you if you like. You can tell things visually. You can tell things through your words. You can tell things through like a variety of ways, and you could also have running gags. And the thing about a joke is timing can be key, and I think that's amazing. And again, that's something that is inherently mathematical as well. Um, and also, and in a show like King of the Hill, there's going to be a lot of jokes. And so you're playing a numbers game with those jokes. You know that some are going to land, and it'll hit for like a good amount of people, and some may not. You're taking that gamble, you're taking that risk, and you're throwing a lot of jokes at people, even if people don't always realize how many jokes are there. Like on some level we process it, but it's like this stuff has been, determined, right? People have thought about this stuff, and I think that's interesting. Just to talk about comedy in general, and so not only do you have that, right? You have the show itself, and again, like I like King of the Hill. It's pretty grounded for the most part in terms of like dealing with a lot of like real world issues. or dealing with sometimes just the mundane and finding the humor in that. And there's a lot of running gags and a lot of just genuinely funny moments. And at the end of the day, right, it's an animated show, and there's a lot of math and animation. um, it's like there's a lot of math in the idea of animation too. So right, because one, we're dealing with motion, right, and motion is something that's inherently mathematical. And then when it comes to the show and how it's made, there's so many things that contribute to it, right? So for starters, right, there's math not only in the motion that we see, but the frames that got us there. There's math in what's being shown to us, right? What's being drawn. There's a lot of geometry going on. There's a lot of consideration of proportions and scale and scope, and drawing this different object, drawing that different object. What are we doing that mimics motion, right? There's a lot of math and all that. And then not only that, the way a lot of shows work, it just kind of because of how they have to work, um, is things are done in advance, right? Like, and it's gonna vary from show to show, and during this time or that time. But for instance, you might have a show have to have some things animated like in a year or two, right? And those things need to be considered. And not only is there math in like what's being animated, and how it's being animated, but like how long it takes, right? That's what I was just talking about. And what's actually being made is going to be determined by, yes, people's minds, but also budget, right? That's important. That's something to consider. And then like what about a show succeeding? Now, what success means is going to vary from person to person. But if we're talking about staying on the air, then there are so many factors that play into it. Because not only do you have to have this well constructed show, right? Um, and you have to make so many decisions about it, right? Because like one, you got your budget, and you're making this decision about like what's being animated based on that and based on people and what they're doing, and also it's like, well, what are we doing with the jokes and how we're structuring them? And not only are you dealing with these things, but you're also considering like how long a show is going to be. It's like, hey, are you dealing with an hour or half an hour structured around commercials? And things have changed with the streaming era, but like that's one thing that some shows still consider to this day. King of the Hill, it was in that half hour format where it's like, hey, there's like about 20 to 22 minutes of this show and then commercials in between and all that stuff. Um, and not only are the things that I just mentioned part of it, but it's just like, well, when is the show going on? Because like that's something that the creators may not have a say in. And with King of the Hill, one of the craziest things to me is that it kind of has been all over the map. Like it usually premiered on Sunday, but like at different times throughout, and throughout the years, it's just like it's taken some hits because it's like it would sometimes get preempted by football games. And so it's just like when a show premieres is important, right? Um, and the creators may not always get a say in that. And then is there structure in the show? They're leaving time for ads, and there's math in that, and math in the ads, and math and just money, and how it's being used across the board. And then back to the show as a whole. Not only do you have all the animation stuff and how long the show's going to be and where it ends up, you have like how each episode is structured, right? Like you might have the ideas like, oh well, not only do we have X amount of jokes running throughout the episode, but we have an A plot, we have a B plot, and spread out over this 20 minutes. And then on top of that, right, you have the intro, which for King of the Hill is iconic. And if you didn't know the name of the song that's playing, it's Yahoo's in Triangles, which, triangles, come on, that's mathematical. And, they actually use triangles in the song. But here's the thing, right? Not only is there math in what I just said, but there's math in the music and how it's composed, right? Math in the notes, how long those last, math in the instrumentation, math for how long that song is running, And in the case of this song, you know, you hear certain things throughout it, and the way it goes is, you know, it opens, and then things are really moving quickly. Is like the guys are in the alley, and there's math in that. And also just playing around with speed and to indicate the passage of time. And so I think that's pretty cool, and it's iconic because like when you make something like that, you have to determine, yes, the music, and how that comes across in composing it, but you have to also like deal with the animation and what you want to get across. What are you saying about this character, that character, these characters, um, and how long things are going to be? How much of the episode is that going to be? Um, and so I think that's pretty interesting. Um, and not only that, not only all the things that I mentioned, but so math within the actual universe, right? Here's the thing about King Hill, right? It's just like a lot of it's like reality in a sense that, you know, they live. I'm sorry, they live in a world very similar to ours, um, and math is used in the same capacity as in our world, where it's just like, well, the math is everywhere, but it doesn't always get talked about. Um, and so, you know, it'll be used for different things, like could be used for propane and propane accessories. You know, feeling propane, using that propane to heat up food. Not even kidding on that, right? Because there's math in filling a tank. There's math in grilling food, like dealing with the heat, dealing with the timing, dealing with what that food, what the propane is doing to the food, and even the structure of propane itself. And there's math in the geometry involved in that container and how much propane is going to handle. So I mean, like I joke about the propane and propane accessories part, but like it's true, and there's just so much that goes in with that. Um, so yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else major that I wanted to talk about. Oh, I wanted to go back to the ratings because, like, so one, comedy is like it's interesting, right? Because like you may have people that want to do what they want to do with it and have fun, and they're very good at what they do, and they may also want to like inject different you know, things story wise, but you might have a network saying, oh, well, no, we don't want that. It's like, well, we want you to not focus on character development. Oh, we want you to not focus on story arcs because we want to be able to show this or that, just out of order if we wanted to. And that can affect what creators do. And I think that's worth noting. Like, because that impacts some things, right? Like how a show is structured, and it could be messing with a formula that was working with previously. And while King of the Hill is no exception to dealing with that sort of stuff, I feel like it actually dealt with things pretty well overall, right? And I think like they were able to still get away with having certain storylines. They were still able to get away with character development. Even again, like I think some people have a very different view of those later seasons than I do. I don't think the characters got too typecasted. I don't think they got flanderized as much as people think they have been. At least that's my opinion on it. But yeah, so it's just like it's interesting. There's so much that goes into making a show. And also one of the things, well, few things that I also wanted to mention is like, so there's also math in the voice acting, right? Because like not only is there math in how you voice a character, right? Like the volume at which you're voicing a character, how you dictate their speech pattern. Because like, well, maybe they're taking X amount of time between this word, that word. You know, maybe they're speeding up as they talk. Maybe they have a unique speech pattern like Boomhauer. And no matter how you cut it, there's math in those decisions that get made, and there's math in the breathing, and there's math in the dubbing, and there's math also outside the voice acting. There's math with the writing, and you know, determining how things are going to play out over an episode, or how over an arc, or over a season, or over the show as a whole. And there's math in just bringing everything together. And then one of the other things is like there's math in the ratings and how that impacts a show's development. And with King of the Hill, it's one of those weird things where like the ratings were never bad and they were pretty consistent. And even when they dropped to their lowest, it still wasn't as bad as it could have been. And you know they were recovering over time, but they still got the boot. And They were still dealing with like getting preempted by football games, or either whole episodes get skipped or parts of it get skipped, or some other things get moved to another season, and that affects, naturally the ratings to a degree. But again, with King of the Hill, it still did pretty well, but it did not make it out, and that sucks so much. But it is getting revived. And I think that's worth mentioning. Um, and so I'm trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to mention, because there's so much more you could talk about. So I'm gonna switch gears and talk about more about what I think of the show. Um, I mean, by now you could get that I like it. I'm a fan. There's some really funny characters in that show. Um, and I think like the funniest may be Dale and Peggy. And it's kind of funny because like I feel like those characters didn't get nearly enough screen time together. And I will say though, when they did, and they were like playing to their strengths and their character weaknesses at the same time, they were a great pair, because they're very similar in some ways, and I like that. And it's good, the kind of thing where it's like I think there's so many awful people in King of the Hill, but not all of them are funny to me. Or you know what I mean, like they're not funny on their own. They might be like funny in how they interact with others, or others interact with them, but like there's some characters who are just like just really funny to me. And I think like with Dale in particular, that character is almost never not funny, like consistently funny. And Becky, I know like some times I'm like, I don't know, but more often than not, Peggy is funny, and like both her and Dale have their awful moments, but more often than not, those awful moments are funny. Um, Hank is pretty consistently funny, being the straight man for the most part. Bobby definitely has his moments. Boomhauer is just funny. I enjoy his speech pattern. Um, I hate Bill. Bill's not a funny character. I think like the performance is good, because like all the performances are good to me, like for the voice acting, but the character of Bill is awful. Same with Cotton. um, um, and then like Khan is sometimes funny, sometimes not. Um, Connie is pretty good character, I think, and Ming. I don't feel like we see enough of Ming, but she has her moments too. And then there's just characters that pop up over time. There's a lot of guest stars. Some like will shock you. Some you're like okay. But I think it's a pretty consistently good show. I got to actually see it back when it premiered. Back when I was a kid. I was like 9, going on 10. It's kind of crazy. And then like it just kept on going. It was still going when I was in college. Right? Like so 2010, it was like going until like because I think it was like mid 2010, or like getting there. So I wasn't quite 23. So yeah, I was 22 going on 23, I think, around that time. So it's just like crazy that it ran for 13 years, and that like I got to watch that as a kid in my teenage years, and then through college. Like that's kind of crazy. And here I am, 36, and more King of the Hill is in the way, on the way in the future. And though this video is not about Futurama, speaking of the future, that has been revived and is going right now, and I gotta catch up at some point. In any case, I'm excited about the King of the Hill revival, and again, I can't stress this enough. I enjoy the voice cast, and I think it's really well written. Um, and there's a number of talents that have passed from King of the Hill, and that super sucks. But wow, did they give some amazing performances in that show, and just generally, everyone is really talented. Um, but yeah, so King of the Hill is one of our favorite shows, and not only did I watch it, over time, and I still watch it to this day. In fact, I've been watching it, more than I already do, like lately. But I remember there was a point when I was younger, and it was like on Adult Swim, and they did a thing with Adult Swim where they would run it, and then they would like run it again like in the early morning. And so I think I can't remember. I think it was at 6 o'clock at one point or another, and I would watch that. I would like wake up and I would watch that. And that was cool. But yeah, so over the years, I watched King of the Hill, and it rarely disappoints. And I watched it since it's come out, and so that's particularly crazy because it's like, oh my god, time. Like, what is anything, right? Because it would. Oh my god, wait a minute, wait a minute. Yeah, so it's like I've been watching that show for 26 years. Is that right? Yes, it is. That's kind of crazy, right? Because it's like it was on the season, like it was on the air for 13 years, and it's been off for 13 years. I've been watching King of the Hill for 26 years. I feel like I've come to this realization before about something, like several shows, like not the same numbers, but the same sort of thing where it's like, oh, well, X show was on for X amount of years, and now it's been the same amount of time since the show's been off the air. That's eerily familiar. I want to I remember what those shows were, but I remember this sort of thing. Anyway, King of the Hill, one of my favorite shows, really hilarious. A lot of math in it, whether you realize it or not. And to the point where, I mean, they literally have math class. But seriously, like behind the scenes and on the surface, there's a lot of math, and I dig it. And if you're not a fan of the show, I doubt you would be watching this video. But if you are, please feel free to share things about the show that you enjoyed, any of your favorite characters or favorite episodes, whatever. I'll see you in the future. Professor Prime out.